Okay, I think this is where we ended at the last of Class 1. And so this will be Class 2. And after we get this recorded, then everything should be up to date and I'll get it on YouTube. Last class, class number 1, we looked at well over a dozen passages that clearly identifies and tells us that real life is found only in Christ Himself. And we looked at passage after passage after passage that confirms this. We looked at the words that Paul wrote to the Colossians, and he says, "For as far as this world is concerned, you've died, and your new real life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you will also appear with Him in the splendor of His glory." Well, clearly, if the Bible is true, as we Christians hold, then Paul's words tell us very clearly that real life is not of this earth. Real life is with Christ. It's found in Him and Him alone. Yet I don't think that many Christians really grasp the true understanding of what this passage really means. And I don't think perhaps we can understand it and understand what real life is until we grasp and understand what our purpose in life is. Now we're going to spend at least one evening on this in the weeks ahead, because in my book I spend a couple of chapters discussing this, because this is such an important concept for us to understand if we're going to understand death the way God understands it. But notice that throughout these passages that we looked at, Jesus is constantly calling His followers to deny self, to turn away from self, to pick up their cross daily and follow Him. And He does this because He wants us to understand what real life is. John writes, "He who has the Son has the life." That's where the life is. He who has the Son has the life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have the life. Well, that seems to be pretty clear. The problem with too many Christians is that they end up sort of chasing after the wind, as Solomon writes about in the book of Proverbs, and seeking to find real life on this earth in things, generally material things, or prestige, or power. And that's generally what we mean when we deem someone to be successful. Oh, they've made a lot of money, or look at what position they've risen to. Look at what educational credentials they have. They're successful. And Jesus is teaching us, as is the writers of the New Testament books, that this is not real life. These things do not account for real life. That real life is found only in Christ, and Christ constantly taught His followers to deny self and to deny the world. Anyone who loves the world does not have the love of Christ within him. Well, if real life is found only in God, then we can't help but wonder, what is our purpose and our meaning to life? How do we find meaning, real purpose? Well, I too wanted to know the answer to this, and one of the sources I found to try to give me direction on what real life is, well, I'll let you watch it.
Please stop. If it turns out Allie doesn't want to know how we get here, she wants to know why we're here, why God put us on Earth, and she's waiting for Ray to answer her.
What's wrong with you? It's simple. Oh, okay, yeah. We're going to learn the meaning of life from a guy who once threw his shoe at a swan. That's called protecting your sandwich. Listen to me. Here's what life is. You're born, you go to school, you go to work, you die. That's it. That's all. Cannoli Marie. Listen, we're not talking about what we do while we're here, Dad.
Yeah, the big question is why we're here in the first place. You know, I've spent many a night lying in bed thinking about this kind of stuff. Life's imponderables. Where are we in the big scheme of things?
I think Allie's too young to be worrying about things like this.
No, I'm proud of her. I love it that she's such an independent thinker.
If she's so independent, why can't she figure this out herself?
Listen, just get up there and tell her that God put us on earth to help each other. It's simple, it's direct, it's a good way for her to live her life.
What are you talking about? That doesn't answer anything. But what are you telling me that God said, earth, let's see, what should I put there?
That's your God?
Yeah.
No way. It's got to be deeper and cool. Hello, I'm God.
Keep going, Raymond. I think you're a wonderful God.
Thank you. Thank you. So what did God say? Hey, I'm going to put some humans on Earth so they can help each other. Or I could just skip humans altogether and go hit a bucket of balls.
Oh, I know. It's all in the Bible.
You ever think about space? What is it? Is it really endless? I mean, if you had a spaceship, could you go flying and fly through space forever?
Why don't you give it a shot?
No, I'm not kidding around here. I mean, how can space go on forever? And if it doesn't, then what's at the end, huh?
Stop it, Robbie. You give yourself a tummy ache.
What about the beginning of time? What was it before that? Before time? Nothing? I mean, what is nothing? How could there be nothing? Does that bother anybody else?
Everybody, listen to me. Listen. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay. Let there be light. Okay. It might take me a minute more.
A minute more, Marie, religious scholars spend their entire lives trying to answer this question. You're not just going to flip through the Bible and find the meaning of life.
Oh, ye of little faith. That's in here somewhere, too.
Well, maybe second thought, that's not the best place to look for the meaning and the purpose to life, so maybe we need to look elsewhere for that. Well, we ended our first class, and it's interesting to hear what people on the street, just random people, what they say when asked the question of what is the purpose of life. And the response that you get from people is quite interesting. Generally, you'll hear people respond to that question like, well, the purpose is to enjoy life, to be happy, to raise a happy family and have fun, to become successful, and to avoid pain and suffering, to live as long as possible. Let me show you what I mean when you sample people and ask them this question. Now, this video will come up in just a moment. Thought you might like to hear what people have to say to what is the purpose of life.
I don't have any purpose in life. I just take it as it comes.
To be loved, to be happy, to have a family that's secure and healthy. To be happy, I don't know. To be happy, I don't know.
Well, how to answer that one? Sunshine. Beautiful women like my wife there. There's a nice cold beer here in about an hour.
The purpose of my life is to just see what God wants me to do and follow it as best I can and worship Him.
Well, I'm retired, just having a good time. I don't have a big vision.
To be a good person, to live and respect other people.
The purpose of my life? To have a good time, enjoy life. That's my purpose. I'd say to finish college. Coming up pretty soon. Then I'll move on from there. I'll probably have another purpose in about 6 months, but right now finish college. Be happy. Be happy.
That's it. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Purpose of my life, right, is to as much as I possibly can. Enjoy my grandkids. My daughter just got married on Sunday, so we're really enjoying ourselves.
Happiness. Okay?
And yet you have to wonder, is that really the purpose of life? If God created life, was that really His intent, His purpose, that we be happy? I hope we'll find the answer to that as we go through these classes. While all of these things, these responses and these answers might sound reasonable to answer the question of what is the purpose of life, you might notice that almost all of these answers, all of these responses, have one thing in common. Most of these answers are focused upon self. Most people, when they respond to this question, have some angle that focuses back on themselves. Let's face it, many people live their life as if life is all about them. And if you're one of these people, living your life as if life is all about you, then I've got some news for you. Life is not about you, and life is not about me. It's all about God, the Creator. Now, if you do believe that life is all about you, that your purpose is to be happy, then I've got some big news for you. You might be interested in going down to your favorite music store and picking up this video.
It's all about me.
It is all about you. Now, the greatest collection of me worship ever assembled on one CD.
It's all about how I lift my name on high.
All 20 songs, all about you.
My praises I exalt thee.
This amazing collection is great to share with friends, if you have any. Everyone can join in the worship with you, for you, and about you. Because you are unique, and you love you.
There is none like me. No one else.
All this for only $19.95. Operators are standing by to serve you.
And I am why I sing, and I am why I live.
If you order now, you'll also receive a second CD of Yuletide favorites. Call 1-800-MEE-ME or order online at MeMyselfAndI.com. All day, because no one can praise you like you.
Well, if life is all about you, then you may want to pick up a copy of this tape. Well, we've been talking about those people who have given up their life for their beliefs. And we've talked about the fact that the one common element that all of these people have is that they see that there is a real life, a better life, something beyond this earth that constitutes real life. That real life isn't of this earth. And therefore they're willing to give up their life on this earth for that which they believe, and believing that real life exists beyond this earth. And in this class we're trying to understand what real life is. What is the meaning of real life? And I think that one man has captured an understanding of this very clearly. He's a Christian man who lived far away in the outreaches, the jungles of Africa. He wrote these words before he was put to death for the things that he believes in. He's a man from Rwanda, Africa, and he was put to death because he would not renounce his beliefs in Jesus Christ. But before he was put to death, he wrote words that I think epitomize what we're trying to understand, what real life actually is. Let me read what he wrote to you. He says, I am part of the fellowship of the unashamed. I have the Holy Spirit power. The die has been cast. I'm not going back. I have stepped over the line. The decision has been made. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ, and I won't look back. Let up, slow down, back away, or be still. My past is redeemed. My present makes sense, and my future is secure. I am finished and done with low living, sight walking, small planning, smooth knees, colorless dreams, tame visions, mundane talking, chintzy giving, and dwarfed goals. I no longer need preeminence, prosperity, position, promotions, plaudits, or popularity. I don't have to be right, first, tops, recognized, praised, regarded, or rewarded. I now live by presence, learn by faith, love by patience, lift by power, and labor by power. Lift by prayer and labor by power. My pace is set. My gait is fast. My goal is heaven. My road is narrow and my way is rough. My companions are few. My guide is reliable. My mission is clear. I cannot be bought, compromised, detoured, lured away, turned back, deluded, or delayed. I will not flinch in the face of sacrifice, hesitate in the presence of adversity, negotiate at the table of the enemy, ponder at the pool of popularity, or meander in the maze of mediocrity. I won't give up, back up, let up, or shut up until I've preached up, prayed up, paid up, stored up, and stayed up for the cause of Christ. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I must go until he returns, give until I drop, preach until all know, and work until he comes. And when he comes to get his own, he will have no problem recognizing me. My colors will be clear. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. What powerful words these are. This is a man who truly understands why God created us, what his purpose in life is, and what the meaning to life is. Strong words. Well, it seems that if each individual determines their own meaning to life, if God doesn't exist, and the meaning is found in each individual person, then it seems that there would be no ultimate standard for what life is truly about. It would be up to each person. If it were up to each individual to determine the meaning of life, then life would potentially have a different meaning for everyone. And particularly if our focus and our meaning is set upon the self. And yet if what Jesus taught is true, that he is the life, then it would seem that the ultimate meaning and purpose for life would be found in one source alone, Christ himself. I think this point can be made clear by looking at the book of Job. I think that in the book of Job, we get a glimpse of what real life actually means from God's perspective. Now, months ago, Mother Angelica wrote the miscarriage prayer, which I read to you last week. And I think that poem, that prayer that she wrote, could fit in perfectly with the book of Job. We're going to review the book of Job, but as we do, notice that there is a deeper meaning hidden in the book of Job that is often overlooked. A meaning that I think reveals the real meaning of what life is. I think tucked away in this book is something that we often overlook. And that is the understanding of what real life is all about. Let's go through the book and see if we can find, if it reveals to us what real life actually is. Now, we remember the story of Job. God is proud of Job, so proud that he chooses to show Job off to Satan. Now, I personally think that God had much more in mind than just showing off Job and his righteousness to Satan. But we'll get to that part in a minute. But for now, let's just kind of refresh our minds. Satan, as we remember, accuses God of putting a hedge around Job. In other words, Satan is saying to God, well, no wonder he's so righteous. No wonder he praises you. Look at what all you've given him. He's rich. He's got everything. You've put a hedge around him. No wonder he worships you. You've protected him. And so this is the claim that Satan makes back to God, that God has simply put a hedge around Job. And so Satan then challenges God and says that if you'll just take these blessings away, he won't praise you, he won't worship you. He does that only because of what you've given to him. And God's response seems to be, well, okay, I don't think you're right, Satan, but let's go ahead and give it a test. And so God gives to Satan limited power. He won't allow Satan to take Job's life, but he will allow Satan to do whatever else he might want. Well, very quickly, Job finds himself in the darkest valley that he could have imagined. He loses everything, his children, his finances, his livestock, his home, everything that he has, even his health. He loses it all. Now, we know that even after Job's wife admonishes Job and says to curse him and die, Job, Job's friends come around and they offer their advice to Job. Now, for the next 36 chapters of the book of Job, we get this discourse between Job and his 4 friends. And Job responds throughout to their advice to him. And Job's response to each one of his friends is that he has no sins that he knows of to confess. No sins that he hasn't already confessed. Job's not saying that he's not a sinner. What he's saying is, I've confessed everything that I know of. I've confessed it all to God. I'm sorrowful for my sins, and I've confessed that. And yet I don't understand why this is happening to me. And this is the question that Job deals with throughout the book of Job. Why? Why is this happening to me? And so throughout the story, Job never stops asking or seeking an answer to his why question. And he keeps insisting that he wants his day in court with God just to present his case. If I can just go before God and present my case, then I'm sure he would understand. And so Job pursues his why question and wants to stand before God to present his case to him. Now, the book of Job never deals with the real theme of the book until it gets to near the end of the book, when we finally get to the final chapters. Because the real purpose of the book of Job is to teach us about God's sovereignty. So many people think the book of Job is about pain and suffering, and it is about pain and suffering, but that's not the theme of the book. That's not the purpose of the book. The purpose is to teach us about God's sovereignty. And we see this theme start to unfold only after we get to chapter 38 and beyond. And we see it unfold in a rather unique way. Now, I think it's worth revisiting chapter 38 just so that we can see the way in which God responds to Job's why question. Job continually, for 36 chapters, has asked the question, why? I don't get it. Why? And why are you so silent, God? Why won't you give me an answer? I just want to know why. I don't hear you, God. Why don't you respond? And this is Job's quest, to have God respond to him and answer him. Well, it's in the way that God responds to Job that we can find, I believe, the real meaning to life. Let's take a look at this. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, Job, and you shall instruct me. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundation of the earth? Where were you, Job? When the foundation of the earth was laid, Job, where were you? Tell me, Job, if you have understanding to this. Hey, Job, who set its measurements, since you know all things? Or who stretched the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone, Job? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy, who did that, Job? Or who enclosed the sea with doors when bursting forth it went out from the womb? Who did that, Job? Job, you're awfully silent. I don't hear you speaking. When I made a cloud its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and I placed boundaries on it and set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus for you shall come, thus far you shall come, but no further, and here shall your proud waves stop. Can you do that, Job? Can you? Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, Job? Have you ever done that? That it might take hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it. How about it, Job? Have you ever done that? Job, I don't hear you. Won't you answer me, Job? It is changed like clay under the seal, and they stand forth like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. Have you, Job, entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have you done that, Job? What's that, Job? I don't hear you, Job. Won't you answer me? Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked into the recesses of the deep, Job? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, Job? Or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth, Job? How about that? Tell me if you know all this stuff, Job. Answer me, Job. Where is the way to the dwelling of light, Job? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, Job, for you were born then, and the number of your days is so great, Job. Can you hear the sarcasm that God is using? Can you imagine Job? He's got to be shaking, hiding under the nearest rock, trying to get as far away from God as he possibly can. Job, have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle? Have you done that, Job? How about it, Job? Where is the way that the light is divided? Or the east wind scattered on the earth? Where is that, Job? Who has cleft a channel for the flood, Job, or a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land without people, on a desert without a man in it, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the seeds of grass to sprout? Has the rain a father, Job, or who has begotten the drops of dew, Job? Who's done that, Job? Job, you haven't answered one of my questions. From whose womb has come the ice and the frost of heaven? Who has given it birth, Job? How about it, Job? Can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? You got control over the stars, do you, Job? Can you lead forth a constellation in its season and guide the bear with her satellites? Can you do that, Job? Can you move the stars around? Can you shuffle them up? How many times have you done that, Job? I don't hear you, Job. You're awfully quiet. Do you know, Job, the ordinances of the heavens and fix their rule over the earth? Do you do that, Job? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that an abundance of water will cover you? Can you do that, Job? Can you cause it to rain? Can you cause it to hail? Can you do that, Job? Tell me, Job, if you're so great. Can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Job, who has put wisdom in the innermost being, or given understanding to the mind? Who can count the clouds by wisdom, or tip the water jars of the heavens when the dust hardens into a mass and the clods stick together? Who's done that, Job? Job, can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens and lie in wait in their lair? You do that, Job? How about it, Job? I don't hear you, Job. Hey, Job, who prepares for the raven its nourishment when its young cry to God and wander about without food? Who does that, Job? Well, we don't have to read chapters 39 at this point in order to see God's approach to answering Job's why questions. God doesn't have to answer the why question. God simply responds with questions of his own. And through this, God is thunderously revealing to Job that he is the one who has done these things, that God is the one. It causes Job to realize how small and insignificant he is, how finite his knowledge, how limited his abilities. And from this, Job is able to see that there is not even a remote comparison between him and God. Job seems to suddenly recognize that he is dealing with a power so infinitely great and vast, so far beyond his knowledge and his own abilities, that he has no right to question the creator of all of this. He has no right to ask the why question. As the creator of life, God creates the way he wants, when He wants, how He wants, why He wants, the purpose for why He creates. God is the one who determines that. And quite frankly, if we don't like it, get over it. It's too bad. He's the creator. We're the created. He's the potter. We're simply the clay. Our God is in heaven, and He does whatever pleases Him, the psalmist writes. God does it the way He wants, when He wants, and how He wants. And we have no right to question the great potter. Remember that in chapters 34 and 35, Leighow had accused Job of being someone whose words were without knowledge. Well, Job is finding this out quickly when God confronts him, how little knowledge and insight he has. And God said to Job that he darkens counsel by words without knowledge. I made a note that this seems to be a play on the idea of darkness and something being hidden. Job seems to have drawn conclusions about the nature of God, about who God is, from his earthly perspective. And suddenly he gets to see a glimpse of God from a totally different perspective. And that is exactly why we're teaching these classes, with the belief, the hope, the idea that we can begin to look at life and death, those two realities, through the eyes of God, from God's perspective. And that's exactly what God did with Job. He confronts Job, and in essence he says to Job, Job, I'm going to give you a look at life from a totally different perspective. I'm going to give you a look at life through an eternal, divine, heavenly, sovereign perspective. My perspective, Job. And you're going to suddenly see things so different. And that's what I believe we will come to if we could ever reach that point of seeing two realities, life and death, through God's eyes, through God's perspective. Well, the book of Job is interesting indeed. And we can learn so much from it. Well, in his speech, God will question Job in order to remind him that even in that which is revealed, the things on earth that we can see, touch, feel, hear, even in those things, God's power and His majesty, He rules over all of nature. And God reveals this to Job. Yes, Job, you can see the waterfalls, you can feel the rain come down, but I, Job, am in control of those things. You are not. And from that, Job gets the opportunity to see and recognize that there's so much hidden that Job simply has no knowledge of. And so if this is true for creation and its creatures, how much more is it true in relation to the wisdom and purpose of the Creator? In other words, if we can see and touch nature, but God is in control of all of nature, things that we can't understand, how much greater is God's wisdom when it comes to our purpose in life? And so God questions Job about whether he has either the knowledge or the ability, the power, to do these things. Well, the answer is obvious. Job does not. And so in light of this answer, God has reminded Job that he cannot see completely what God is doing. And so there may well be things that God is doing, has planned, that we simply have no knowledge of right now. Well, in chapter 38, God seems to only have to ask one question to get his point across. Probably this one verse would have taken care of all the rest. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundation of the earth? And so Job is confronted immediately with his smallness, his insignificance, because he wasn't present when God created these things. He didn't observe what had taken place, and he certainly had no right to question how things were done. And so how could Job possibly advise God or question God as to these questions of what, when, where, how, or why? But I think in this story there's another point that is being made that is very pertinent to our study. And that's the question of Job's purpose and the meaning of life. And I think if we look deep enough into this book, we can get a hint to answer these questions. Job had previously shown that he understood his purpose for existence, that it was to glorify God. Remember, after all of these things that happened to Job, the loss of his children, the loss of his livestock, his health, everything gone, what was the first thing that Job did? He bowed down and worshiped God. That shows us that Job seemed to recognize his purpose, that it was all for the glory of God. And so he did that for which he was created. He worshiped God, regardless of his circumstances. So I think Job had demonstrated that he understood it, but I think he lost track of that in his quest to understand the why of it all. And so we talked about this, that the first thing that Job did was to bow down and worship God. But he seems to have forgotten the most important lesson of all during his quest to find out why. It seems as if he put aside his understanding that he was created to glorify God. Well, I just made a note that because of sin, we are never going to do a very good job of glorifying God here on this earth. But we'll do a perfect job of glorifying God in God's heavenly realm. You see, it's only when we leave this earth, only when we pass through the doors of death, that we'll finally be able to do that for which we were created, to glorify God. And we're going to spend a couple of chapters in the book discussing this and looking at lots of passages that clearly affirm why we were created. Sin entered the world back in the garden. And think about it. When sin entered the world, every route, every path, every door to God was closed except one door. The door of death. When sin entered the world, every single route to God was closed except for one. Death. Remember that the wages of sin is death. Jesus said that no one comes to the Father except through me. And we know that Jesus also walked the path of sorrow and suffering and death himself. He walked what is called the path of sorrow, the Via Dolorosa. If you ever have a chance to visit Jerusalem, on your tour you'll get a chance to walk the very path that Jesus walked as he was beaten and flogged and mocked on the way to the cross, the Via Dolorosa. Well, I don't know about you, but I rejoice over the death of Christ, because apart from that, I would have no hope. His willingness to die and go through the doors of death and in a real life opened those doors for me. And so when we think about it, death should really be the happiest event that we could ever celebrate for the believer in Christ, because it is the only path, the only way that we have of coming to God. And our problem is we don't embrace this doorway, this pathway to God. We don't embrace it closely enough. Well, so you might want to consider a different perspective on those 172,000 people who died yesterday and the 63 million people who died this past year. Remember that we talked about in the last lesson how many people die every second, every day, every year. You might want to consider a different perspective. We ought to rejoice and celebrate the death of every one of those who have given their life to Christ. Paul writes in Philippians, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." He goes on and he says, "But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. But I do not know which to choose, because I'm hard pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake." Paul gave up self, recognized that it was better that he remain on this earth for the sake of others, so that we could have the gospel, rather than for him to depart and be with the Lord. Paul was torn up over this because, remember, he had been given a glimpse of heaven, and he wanted to be with God. He wanted so badly to be with his Lord that he had to logically think through this. And he does that here. He said, boy, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. But it's better that I remain here for your sake. He walks through the logic of it all. And so it doesn't matter whether one of those who died yesterday was one of the 0.0000002% of the people that you knew and grieved for, or whether those were part of the 99.999999998% of the people that you didn't grieve for. Every single one of those who were believers were created for God and for His glory and for God's joy, for God's pleasure. Not for our pleasure, but for God's. And each one of these people fills a particular purpose in God's plan, a purpose that no one else can fill in God's kingdom. We've got this grieving thing all wrong. Our grieving should be for those who died and did not know Christ. But for those who know Christ, we should rejoice. They get to go home. They get to travel the path, the road, the only path that will take them to God. And that path takes us through the doors of death. Well, so maybe real life is not just getting another day to live. Maybe it's not just living as many days as we possibly can. Maybe that's not real life. Living to be 100 instead of dying at 45. maybe those extra years is not the definition of real life. Maybe real life is living for God under every circumstance that comes along each day. If God is a creator of life, then the only real purpose would be found in Him, it would seem. And Jesus tells us that to give up the world and everything in the world, including ourselves, is the only way that we can be a true follower of Christ Himself. And so maybe we can learn from this that the only thing that really matters is to live according to God's will. And living according to God's will, maybe that is what real life is. Because when we live according to God's will, what do? We please God. And when we please God, we're worshiping and praising God. We're glorifying God. And why were we created? To glorify God. Perhaps that's real life. And so I said that maybe real life is not how we come to love being happy and having good things happen, but rather maybe real life comes when we give up what we think is life and follow what real life truly is. Well, we need to take a little deeper look at understanding real life before we move on into our study on death. I think it's essential that we understand and have a firm understanding in our minds of what real life is. Because I think it's only in understanding what real life is that we can understand death. Well, if we use the Bible to try to find out and understand what real life is, we've just looked at the book of Job. Where else might we look? Where else in the Bible might give us a good understanding of what real life is? Well, I think that there is an excellent book in the Bible that teaches us about real life. It's an interesting study in the book that Solomon wrote called the book of Ecclesiastes. And we're going to take a look at that book of Ecclesiastes before we finish this segment, part 2 of our study. But I think I have a video here to show you about one more glimpse of what people are saying about the purpose of life. Oops, no, I took that out for this. But you've looked at one video, you've seen what people on the streets say when asked the question. Socrates says that to fear death is only to think ourselves wise without being wise, for it is to think that we know what we do not know. For anything that men can tell, death may be the greatest good that can happen. But they fear it as if they knew quite well that it was the greatest of evils. And what is this but that shameful ignorance of thinking that we know what we do not know? You can relate this to Job. Job suddenly recognized how little he knew. I think Job parallels these words of the great philosopher Socrates. Well, I think that, that ends this half of Class 2. We're going to stop here, and I'll break for just a moment, and we'll finish the rest of this second class. This will be a long video segment on YouTube for you, but we'll finish up in just a moment. I'll take a break, and we'll come right back to you.